geez, when I think about it now, 93, 03, 13, I've been teaching a long time. Well, the first few years of teaching, we're still rolling. You can use this too if you want. The first year I taught, I had a hard time getting in front of people. And thanks to the dojo, I don't mind being in front of people at all. I can get in front of people and talk. And that's all part of the karate experience as a teacher. But I get in front of people and I was so concerned, you know, what do the students think of me? You know, oh, and I'd be mumbling and oh, we can't hear you. And then I'd talk up and as time passed, I realized that the students are more concerned, what does the teacher think of me? Not what they think of me as a teacher, but they're concerned, what does the teacher think of them? And that's their headset. And after about a year, I decided that the teaching, this just isn't for me. I don't think I'm cut out to be a teacher. And I came in to the dojo, and I was going to explain to Mr. Durkin that I wasn't going to be teaching anymore, and that I appreciated the chance. And before I could say anything, he called me in his office, and he asked me to sit down, and he said, I want you to know that you're making a lot of progress as a teacher, and you know, you're really making some progress, and we're glad you're part of the teaching staff. And so I just kept my mouth shut. I didn't throw in the towel. I just kept teaching.
Today on the podcast, we have someone who's been incredibly instrumental to my martial arts and life in and out of the dojo, Sensei Bob Beal. Mr. Beal began his Uechi-Ryu Karate practice in 1975 under Richard Pinkham.
Since 1989.
He's been a student of Buzz Durkin. He's an 8th degree black belt and has been teaching at Mr. Durkin's school since 1993. I have always been profoundly impressed by the attention Sensei Beal gives to each student in class, his work effort, and his consistency of character. In our interview, we discuss his journey in the martial arts, its relation to calligraphy, music, poetry, and philosophy, all of which he is a student of, and how his karate training has guided him both in and out of the dojo. I've known Mr. Beal for well over 20 years, but even I learned some new things about him and the martial arts during our talk. I hope you do too. Please enjoy Sensei Bob Beal. Mr. Beal, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you being on this podcast with us. To start with, could you just kind of run through how you got started in the martial arts?
Sure. I was in my mid-20s, and I read a couple of books from California about the Charles Manson family, and I was in California when I was 18 years old, and I lived in Manhattan Beach, and the summer of '69. And when I was about 24 years old, I read a book, The Family, and I read another book, Helter Skelter, and I realized I was right in the thick of all that, even though I never knew those people. And they killed 39 people, and most of them just pleaded for their lives. They didn't fight for their life. And I had a friend that was taking karate in Methuen Square, and he introduced me to Richard Pinkham, and I went up there, and I thought to myself, if anybody's going to kill me, they're going to earn it. You know, you can kill me, but it's not going to be for free. And I started practicing martial arts, and my wife started, and that was in 1975. And I've been practicing ever since, and to be very transparent, I've never used it, but I practiced diligently.
So you started the martial arts for very simply the self-defense aspect of it, but I assume, knowing you as I know you, it's less of an assumption that the martial arts have helped you outside of that, outside of the dojo, outside of the physicality of it.
Oh, many times. Everything you do in karate, you try to do to the best of your ability, and we learn that in the dojo, and I just apply that outside, in my outside life. You know, in my job, I was an engineer on the railroad, and when I did my job like a kata. You know, every day was very much the same. It was similar, not exactly the same, but you know, and then I would take notes on my performance. And when I'm in the dojo, you know, I would look at myself in the dojo with a very critical eye. And then I did the same thing at work. And when I was home, I did the same thing at home. Doing Just mundane tasks around the house, you know. It doesn't matter if it's laundry, dishes, mowing the lawn. I mowed the lawn like it was a kata. I did it the same all the time. And I tried to improve on how the yard looked. You know, every time I did any chore, I applied my karate to almost everything I did. You know, and if you do something the same over and over and over, you have an opportunity to improve your performance. If you do something over and over and over different, it's going to be haphazard. And we learn in karate to practice. Perfect practice makes perfect.
Right. So you take that discipline, that focused, intent work from your martial arts, and you apply that to the rest of your life. And I'm assuming that has had great strides in everything you do outside the dojo. Could you speak for any one thing in particular that you think karate has had the most impact on your life?
Interesting question. There was a few times in my life when I was pretty confident it was going to be over, and it wasn't. And I'm very confident it was my karate that got me through it. You don't quit. And I learned that in karate. You don't quit. And a few times on the railroad, I was in some very bad accidents, and you have to do things correctly. And even though it was just my job that I did, it was my job. I was in a very bad train wreck, and we hit an excavator on a lowboy truck at a crossing. It was stalled out, and we derailed at 50 miles an hour. And I had a supervisor with me, and I used to listen to the old-timers tell stories about train wrecks and how they survived. And one of the things they said was, you got to get on the floor and you got to push with all your strength so that you don't bounce around when you make impact. And I came around a curve one night, and there was that lowboy truck, and I put the train into emergency, and I blew the whistle, and then I got on the floor and I pushed. I told my supervisor to get on the floor and push. I said, you got to push as hard as you can. Push like your life depends on it, because it does. And we both laid on the floor, and the train derailed at 50 miles an hour. 40 ambulances showed up, taking people away. Some people were airlifted. Nobody was killed. But my supervisor and I, we walked away. And I was very confident that evening, and the next day I thought about my karate and how, you don't quit. You got to do things, and come crunch time, you just have to do what was right. And I listened to the old-timers, and in karate, when I was a young man, I listened to the old-timers tell stories about karate. And when I was at work, I listened to the old-timers tell stories about, how you survive on the railroad. And I learned a lot by listening to others, those who know. Listen to those who know. And that was one time back in '96 in that train wreck where I was very confident my karate kept me alive. I didn't panic. Maybe my supervisor, when it was all said and done, he was surprised at how calm and collective I was. I got to the radio and I made an emergency broadcast on the radio, and there was another train due by at the same time, and we were over both main lines. The train was derailed, and I communicated with them, and they stopped before they get to us. Otherwise, it would have been a horrendous train wreck. And people ask, how did you know to do that? Well, that was my job. And when I did my job like a kata. When I ran the train, I did everything the same, just like a kata. And I used to think about emergency situations as I went along in the ride. And, you get to places, and you got to know where you are exactly. And my karate kept me alive that night. I'm very confident. And there were other minor things, but dealing with supervisors, dealing with hostile people. When I've dealt with hostile people and everybody seemed to be afraid of them, I was never afraid of them. When you fear somebody, they can feel that, and they feel dominant. And I was with some characters I probably shouldn't have been with, and they tried to dominate the situation, and they didn't. And they were I'm not going to get into the specifics, you know. There was places I were, places I used to frequent that I probably should have never been to, but it was
The joys of youth.
the unbridled passions of youth.
Mm.
You know, when you're young, you try things, and then you realize, you know, maybe I shouldn't be trying these things, you know, and, you know, whether it's, you know, gambling or casinos or wherever you are, you know, it's, when the pain gets too great, you say, geez, that's not working, and you give it up, you know, but there's probably other things that kept me going, thanks to my karate, but I know when I went to a class reunion and I saw my classmates, some of them looked pretty old. I'm in my mid-70s, and some of the people my age, they look pretty old. I've been active all my life, and and I remain active. And I notice age creeping in, but you know, I try not to let that hold me back. You know, I get up, I go to workout, I practice, I stretch, I practice a lot at home. I sit on my feet, Cesar, usually for 30 minutes. I have been for years and years and years. And it really doesn't do anything for you. There's nothing mystical about it, but it gives you the ability to focus. You know, when I sit on my feet, I think about my breathing. Inhale for count of 4, exhale for count of 8. And that sounds so simple when you say it. But then when you do it for 5 minutes, and then you start thinking about, what am I going to do on my vacation? Or what am I going to do next week? I got to go grocery shopping. I have to mow the lawn. And now you're not thinking about your breathing. Now, the idea is to focus on your breath. So then you got to reel yourself in and go back to thinking. Well, I can think about that. I know this sounds very simple.
It's incredibly challenging. I've tried it.
I can sit for 30 minutes and focus on each breath. And there was a time when I could not. My mind wandered, and I have good focus. It's a very simple technique. I learned it in karate. You know, you sit on your feet, Cesar. It's not a comfortable position, but with practice it becomes more comfortable. And I usually stretch out. There's a stretch that I do, and I practice that stretch Wednesday night when I teach a class. It's an old stretch. I don't know how old. I know I learned it from my former martial arts instructor, Richard Pinkham, and he learned it from Howard Flynn. And if you look in the blue book, the Uechi-Ryu blue book, you'll see a picture of Howard Flynn. He was a teacher. He's passed away a long time ago, but he was Richard's teacher. He taught on Church Street in Burlington, New Hampshire. No, excuse me, Burlington, Vermont. He was in Burlington, Vermont, and on Church Street. And that was Richard's teacher, and I told him, you know, I told Richard, I said, we practiced the circle stretch. And he says, yeah, I got that from Howard Flynn. And I'm looking through the blue book, and there's a picture of Howard Flynn in the Uechi-Ryu blue book. That's, the thick book.
Right.
And Richard's in there, Mr. Durkin's in there. There's a few people in there that the Uechi-Ryu history. And,
yeah. So many old names.
yeah.
So you were definitely, the martial arts has helped you so much with that incident you talked about with your daily life, just the being active. I'm with you. I see so many people who are active in one way or another as they grow older and are just so much healthier, can move, can do the basic things you need to do with your body, sitting up on your own, standing, sitting, walking upstairs, just because you're constantly doing something. It's so critical. But you're also very active in other arts, accomplished calligrapher, musician. Do you paint as well? Or
No,
okay.
I'm not a painter.
Okay, but how has the martial arts affected that aspect of what you do, and how have those arts affected your martial arts?
With the calligraphy, this might sound almost childish, but it's not. It's very serious. Every letter is made up of several lines, and the entire alphabet is made up of maybe a half a dozen different lines. So when somebody's doing calligraphy, it's not like writing cursive or printing. You know, when you're writing words and sentences.
Right.
But when you're doing calligraphy, calligraphy is beautiful writing. And you have to make a perfect line. And then you have to make another perfect line, like Sanchen stepping.
Right.
And then you make another perfect line. And eventually you have a letter. And then distancing is important. Distancing is important in karate. Distancing is important in calligraphy. And you start another letter by drawing one line, a perfect line, and then another line, and then another line, and now you have two letters. And you continue that process in that frame of mind, one line at a time, one perfect line at a time. Eventually you have a word, and then you continue, and eventually you have a sentence, and then you go on from there. And it's step by step, but it's an art form. Art means to perfection. And calligraphy is an ancient art. It's not a common thing that's practiced. Before the printing press, the calligraphers and the scriptoriums wrote all the books by hand. And the printing press came along, I don't know, 1450. It was, during the Renaissance, Gutenberg came up with the printing press, put the calligraphers out of business. But, the calligraphy is one line, one perfect line, one Sanchen step, one simple block, one simple strike, and then it becomes a kata. Then it becomes a bunkai. Then it becomes a system of karate. And the calligraphy is no different. When you put the pen to the paper, it's a strike. And it flows. It's an attack. And the same thing applies with music. When you play a note, there's an attack. The striking of the note is the attack, and is it soft? Is it hard? Is it staccato? And if you can't play the music slow correctly, you can't play the music fast the way it's supposed to be played. So you have to play it mathematically correct at a very slow pace and gradually increase the speed. In karate, we do the same thing. You practice slow, one step, one strike, one block, and we learn the kata in steps, we learn the bunkai in steps, and if you can't do the karate slow correctly, you can't do it fast correctly. And it has to be, I think Mr. Durkin, one of his favorite expressions is, inch by inch, it's a cinch. And it sounds childish, but it's not. It's powerful. It's very powerful.
We have a tendency when learning something new to want to be able to do it right away, to go fast through it, to go hard through it, or just do it all, but...
Want to do it like the masters.
Yeah, but you have to break it down. I think I had mentioned this to you earlier, I was at a seminar a few months back, and I was learning something new. I was just trying to rush through, like I was doing my normal stuff in class, and I caught myself, and I had to take a breath, slow it down, and once I did that, it was easier, and I was able to work the technique, but if I had kept going fast, there's no way I would have gotten it.
Yeah. It's, every art is, there's common denominators in every art. Where do we start? We start at the beginning. The basics. Sanchen stepping, the warm-ups. In calligraphy, you got to learn the lines. You don't even do the letters, you just do the lines. In music, you practice the scales. I asked my music teacher one time, I took 8 years of saxophone practice, and every day I went to a lesson. I didn't have a lesson every day, but every lesson I went to, my music teacher would always ask me at the beginning of the lessons, are you practicing your scales? And I'd always say, yes, I practice the scales. You practice them before you practice the music. I said, I do it as you instructed. My music teacher was my sensei. And after 5 years of lessons, I finally asked him, I said, how long do I have to practice these scales? And he said, I don't know. and I thought, you don't know? You got a master's degree in music.
That's like...
because he was still practicing the scales.
Yeah. It's like a karate teacher asking them, how long am I supposed to practice Sanchen for?
Exactly. That's the basics. He said, the reason you practice the scales is because the music you play, The scales are in all the music you play. The reason we practice the warm-ups in karate is because all our moves are in the warm-ups. How long do we have to practice the warm-ups? Do you know? I don't.
I'm still doing it.
I am too. They haven't changed much since 1975.
No.
And when I teach a class, sometimes I'll see people and they look like they're waiting to go on to the good stuff. I can just read that in their face. And I'll say, you know, if you're waiting to get to the good stuff, just remember this is the good stuff when we're doing the warm-ups. And I like doing the warm-ups very traditionally. I like doing them fast. I like getting people fighting for air and red-faced, dripping with sweat. I like doing them slow. I like doing them formally, exact. You can do them all different ways. And that's how you play the scales in music. You play them slow, you play them fast, you slur them, staccato, you double taps, and that's how we do karate. We do it all different ways. So what's the right way? The right way is the way you're doing it right now, to the best of your ability.
So speaking of teaching, you've been teaching martial arts for many years. I can say from my own personal experience, you've had a lasting impact on a lot of, especially teens and young adults. I mean, as you know, some of my best friends at the dojo, I still have today, and we all went up the ranks through your class, and it's so great to see the next generation of teens coming through that class, along with, of course, the adults. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Bill. Those are very kind words. I appreciate that. Coming from you, that means a lot.
Well, speaking to you like this means a lot to me. But what does it mean to you to be a martial arts instructor?
I think what I like about teaching is to see people make progress. You know, sometimes people come to class and they're intermediate athletes. Sometimes people start karate and they're well-accomplished athletes. But there's other people that come to class and they start, and they're indefensible. And they're just thinking, I'm never going to get this. And like I said before, inch by inch it's a cinch. And slow but sure, they do Sanchen, they do Kanchiwa, they do the Bunkais, they do the Kumites, and they don't notice it, but we notice that they're getting stronger. They were helpless, indefensible, and all of a sudden, they get stronger. And I feel really good when I see that. Anybody can teach a shooting star. You know,
Yeah.
somebody that's, you know, a well-accomplished athlete, they come into the dojo and you're teaching them, and it's very enriching to teach a shooting star. You love it. It's the most fascinating thing.
Instant feedback.
And you take somebody that's not a shooting star, somebody that's plugging along, they're struggling, and you bring them forward, and you turn them into a martial artist. That takes talent and patience, and all of a sudden their
Foresight.
self-esteem is improving. They go from, I'll never get this, to, I'm starting to get this, to, I like this. And when you see that take place in a person, I find that very rewarding. And all I ever want to see in any of the students that come to my class is to see them improve.
I agree. And it takes a lot of foresight to see that, because like you said, it's so easy to teach the people that are just very athletically gifted. And it's that instant feedback. But you get those people where you spend sometimes 3, 4, 5 to 10 years, and then you finally see that click. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, they're doing stuff they didn't believe they could ever do. And I find that very, very rewarding.
I agree. So let's talk about something kind of similar to what we've been talking about, maybe a little different. And it's something I've been making a theme of different interviews I've been doing. What to you is the way of karate? Because everyone has their own way, whether that's the Budo, if you want to use those terms, or just the way of training or the way of life. What is that to you, to Bob Beal?
The way of karate, it puts me in the world, and I feel like I'm in control of my life. I feel confident wherever I go. And there's a dichotomy. when we come into the dojo, it's an autocracy. We are under the jurisdiction of who's ever teaching class. They say, we're going to do Sanchen. We do Sanchen. You don't say, I'm going to do Konchiwa. You do what the teacher asks, and nobody's a prisoner here. Everybody can leave when they want. If you don't like it, walk away. But if you do like it, you have to do as you were asked. And there's a type of surrender, for want of a better word. You have to surrender your will to your instructor. But what that does, there's an action reverse that takes place when you go out into the world. Then your life becomes your will, and you control your life. And wherever you go, no matter how the wind blows, no matter how hard it rains, no matter what the storm, no matter how calm things are, you have the strength of character to do the best you can in that situation, thanks to karate. And when I say it's a dichotomy, when I go out of the dojo, I have an extraordinary amount of free will. And when I'm in the dojo, I'm under the jurisdiction of the sensei. And I listen to him, and I do what he asks. And I tested for 8th Dan in 2020, and I was doing private lessons with Sensei Durkin, and he was giving me corrections in Sanchen. And I wasn't discouraged at all. I thought, wow, what a gift. What a gift. And that's what we have here. It's a treasure. I've seen people get corrections and hang their head low. Oh, I've been doing it wrong. Oh, you weren't doing it wrong. You're just doing it better than you were doing it because you got a correction. If you act on it, if you act on it, you'll get another correction. And if you don't act on it, he won't waste time with you. And those corrections, when I went out into the world, when I was working, I used to correct my performance at work. I kept notes on my performance every day. Like I was in the dojo, only I was at work, and I'd be running trains. I was an engineer on the railroad. And I would take notes on my performance, things that displeased me, and I'd try to figure out why. Put on too much brake, going a little rough around a curve, you hit a whatever. And I would try to run the train as smooth as I could and be as on time as possible. And I know this sounds funny. You got a train it's 5 cars long, 6 cars long. The cars are 90 feet apiece. You got a locomotive. It weighs 500 tons. And when I pulled into the station, I ran the train like a kata. So I put the brake on in exactly the same place. And then I put a little more brake on, exactly the same place. And I'd hit a mark coming into the station. I'd be going exactly 30 miles an hour. And I knew I had the train under my thumb. And there was a window on the engineer's seat, next to the engineer's seat, and the window had a bar in it, a metal bar that separated it. And I would line that bar up with a telephone pole or the corner of a building or a sign at that particular station. And I would stop that train in exactly the same place every day because I did it like a kata. And the people would be standing in exactly the right place to board the train because they knew the train was going to stop at that spot, and then they'd just get on the train. So we didn't lose time. We had a schedule, and it was hard keeping the schedule. And then if we came in a little too quick or a little too slow, I'd make notes, about what I was doing. And then at the end of the day, I'd read my notes, and the next day I'd try to improve my performance. I did that till the last day I worked. The last day I didn't bother because there was no tomorrow. But, and guys I worked with, they'd say, how come you have to be like that, Bobby? And I said, because that's my job.
And you're doing your job, living your life with intent versus just free going it.
As perfect as I can do it. As perfect as I'm capable of doing it. And I made mistakes. I wasn't perfect. I was a long ways from perfect. I did make mistakes. But I had students. I was a field instructor. I had students. And I was a harsh teacher. I was very diplomatic. I was very uncompromising. Because when you're teaching them, it's not practice. They're running real trains, and there's 500 people on the train. That's not practice.
Right, you have lives at stake.
Yeah, and I I wasn't unreasonable, but I was very, very particular. There were people that would ride with me, and then they'd leave. I don't want to ride with Bobby anymore. And there were other people that said, I want to stay with Bobby.
Yeah, they got it.
Yeah, they knew.
Mm.
And so, I mean, my karate, the dojo affected my life tremendously. And but the dichotomy, you know, the free will and the surrender of your will when you come in the dojo, and then you go outside, and people don't manipulate you. You know, you're not easily taken advantage of. When you're in a situation, you can tell when people are treating you as an equal. You can tell when people are looking up to you. You can tell when people are looking down at you. And you can tell when they don't care or when they really do care. Mm. And that comes from working out in class. When you have a partner, you know, you have to be discerning, and you have to read people. It's a very important part of karate.
Yes.
And once you get good at it, when you're outside the dojo, it applies in real life. And it applies in a way that is very beneficial. And I hope I pronounce this word correctly. Perspicacious. Perspicacious means very discerning, more than discerning. And I have to say that I know a few people that are truly perspicacious. Mr. Durkin is one of them, and Dave Kelly is another one. Mm. They can read people, and they don't take advantage of anyone. They just get the best. They get people to do the best of their ability, and they bring people forward. And I admire that in both of them and other people in the dojo too. And you're a dojo owner, and I'm sure the same thing applies to you. I'm sure you do the same thing because your dojo is expanding.
I'm trying.
And it's you know and that's a hard thing, starting a dojo. You're doing well.
Thank
you. I'm happy for you. I'm so
that.
glad for you, Mr. Leith. It's wonderful to see.
Mm. Well, I wouldn't have been there without people like yourself and, like you said, Mr. Dirk and Mr. Kelly, but you were definitely one of those instructors that helped me along my way, especially as teenager, young adult, and even now.
Yeah, thank you.
Try to be young at heart still. Actually, one of the things that you definitely had an impact on me prior around turning of age, adulthood, was just your love for philosophy, poetry. Is that something that you also kind of bring into your martial arts, or at least how your active or inactive meditation, your stillness, like how does that correlate?
Well, I like poetry, and I like philosophy. Now, poetry is the highest level of the use of any language, whether it's English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever the language is, Greek. The poetry of that language is the highest quality of the use of that language. And it has been for millenniums, not centuries, thousands of years. And I like the way poetry makes me feel. And I memorize poetry. We have rhymes, limericks, there's tongue twisters. That's not poetry. They're amusing. Limericks and poetry are different. Poetry evokes an emotion. It makes you feel a certain way. And I've spoken about poetry with Sensei Durkin, and the sound of the poem, the gold in the ore, is the sound of the poem. Now, a poem can be written on a piece of paper, but that's not the poem. The poem is a living thing to be spoken. And when you hear a poem or when you recite a poem, the poem comes to life. And when we practice karate, you can read books about karate, you can take pictures of karate, you can do all kinds of things about karate, but karate is a moving art. Yes. And when the karate is moving in the dojo, people moving, practicing Uechi-Ryu, that's karate. That's the gold in the ore, is the movement in the dojo. And the same thing applies with poetry. Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold. Her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. That was by Robert Frost. Nothing gold can stay. And he captures the ephemerality of life. New life. Nature's first green is gold. It's beautiful. And, dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. Everything comes and goes, but the beauty of life is its ephemerality. It's because it doesn't last that it's so precious. And he captures that in those simple lines. And I could expound on poetry.
I know.
I won't take up too
We'll
much
have a
time.
separate
That was a short
podcast.
poem.
We'll have a separate podcast that you just recited
that was
poetry.
a short poem, but the philosophy, I love the I Ching. I've been reading the I Ching, since the early 70s, since before karate. And the I Ching, it's a Taoist philosophy. And you get a solid line and a broken line. A solid line is yang, and a broken line is yin. And the yang line is hard, and the yin line is soft. The Uechi-Ryu is half hard, half soft. And the lines, you have trigrams, you have 8 trigrams that make up to 64 hexagrams. And each hexagram is about, situations in life. And Uechi-Ryu is half hard, half soft. And that's the yin and the yang. Excuse me. But the 8 trigrams, you have the creative, the receptive, you have water, fire, wind, the lake, the mountain, and thunder. Those are the 8 trigrams. And when you double the trigrams, you have 64 hexagrams. And I've studied the I Ching for many years, reading it over and over and over. And 5,000 years ago, it began to evolve. This beautiful Chinese literary icon, it began to evolve 5,000 years ago, and for the next 3,000 years, China's greatest thinkers added to it. And over a period of 3,000 years, they came up with the 10 wings, and the 10 wings make up the I Ching. So when I read the I Ching, I think I'm reading something that 3,000 years of the greatest thinkers put together. And I am so moved by that experience. And I know when I'm reading it, whatever I get out of it, there's more. It's deeper. That's a well of knowledge, and there's no bottom to that well. Every time you go a little deeper, you realize that you can go so much deeper. And the simple metaphors on nature. In hexagram 61, it's the wind over the lake. And the wind blows across the lake and stirs the surface of the water. Thus visible effects of the invisible manifest themselves. And the I Ching is filled with metaphors like that. And you think, the invisible manifests itself. Well, we have radio waves, we have television waves, your telephone, you have a cell phone. It's invisible things that give you the ability to use your cell phone. And we have light waves. We can see because of light waves. But there's gamma rays, infrared. There's all kinds of things. The wind itself is invisible. You can't see the wind. But, that's one of the books that I focus on. I could expound on the I Ching, but I'll just touch on it instead. I like Lao Tzu's 81 poems, the Tao Du Jing. It looks like Tao Te Ching, but it's pronounced properly Tao Du Jing, I believe. And Lao Tzu was around the 3rd or 4th century BC. He was discouraged. He was a scribe, I believe, and a poet. And he was discouraged, and he decided to isolate and go off and be a hermit. And somebody asked him before he left if he'd write something. So he wrote the 81 poems, and then he disappeared. Nobody knows where he disappeared to. But it's the 2nd most translated book in the world. It's a literary icon, and second only to the Bible. The Bible is more translated, but the Tao Du Jing is one of the most translated works. And they're simple poems, one page, one poem, one page, and but they're very thought-provoking, and I'm very fond of the Tao Du Jing. And when I talk about Taoism, I don't think Taoism is something to believe in. I really don't. I think it's a tool to think on a higher level, or maybe on a better level, to think better. It teaches a person to think. There's nothing mystical about it. Maybe when you don't understand, you've never read the book, you might look at it like it's something that it isn't. But it's just a book. Tao Te Ching's just a book, 81 poems, but they mean something. And Lao Tzu lived, I don't know, 2,500 years ago. When you're reading his poetry, you know, this is a very influential person from 2,500 years ago, and his poetry is alive today. And that intrigues me.
Mm. It's funny, when you're talking about the I Ching, you're talking about the deep well of knowledge, and I instantly thought right back to karate, where you can do a kata. Uechi-Ryu only has 8 katas. You can do those katas 100,000 times, and you think you get it. But the well is so deep of knowledge that the more you practice, really, the more you don't know, and the more you have to learn.
It just opens up another door, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite karate memory?
I'd have to think about that. I have a lot of fond memories in karate. When I came here in '89, and I had no idea it was going to develop the way it did. Mr. Durkin, after I got my black belt, he allowed me, I asked him if I could be part of the teaching staff, and he said yes, and then a few years later, Lynn Burroughs left to open his own dojo, and I was given the Wednesday night class, and I started teaching the Wednesday night brown and black belt class, and that was a real wonderful moment for me. And I'm still teaching the Wednesday night class. It's you've taught the Wednesday night class. You taught it for a while, shortly after COVID, and but that was a big moment for me. Mr. Durkin, when he told me a year ahead of time that I was going to be testing the following August, and he said he wanted me to train. I remember it. You know, it was 6 years ago. I remember it like it was last night. And he said, I want you to test for 8th Dan next August. And I was shocked. And he said, I don't want you to practice. And I thought that was odd. He says, I want you to train. You know the difference?
I do.
And I said, yes, I do. And he said, I want you to train. And I went home, and I started training. I took out a notebook, and I made that my training log, and I logged my workouts. I worked out every day at home, 7 days a week, and I worked out here 3 days a week. And I continued to teach, but I worked out every day.
How do you think that?
A couple of times I might have had a cold, and I skipped a few days of practice, but most days I practiced 7 days a week.
How much do you think that different mentality of the practice versus training really helped you improve and got you in the right mindset for the test?
Well, when I went into the test, I felt confident. I wasn't haughty, you know, I wasn't arrogant, I wasn't, you know, walked in there proud, but I was confident from the practice. And I thought that the test was more of a treasured moment in my life. You know, this is a moment that I want to remember. Every moment of this test. And I knew that people there watching the test were all high-ranking Uechi people, and they could appreciate the action of the test. And I really didn't think of it as a test. We call it a test, but I thought of it as one of the greatest treasures experience of my life.
That's pretty impactful.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Beal. It's a pleasure. That was fun. That was good. Anything else you
Did I
wanted?
pass the audition?
You passed the audition. You get to stay.